Today, February 1st, 2021, begins Black History Month. Our nation continues to struggle with racial inequalities, and we must understand how history has impacted the present and start to generate solutions that are affecting so many African American communities. As we take time this month to celebrate Black history and the African American role in the development of this country, I want to take a moment to focus on the most integral part of that movement, the Black church. To help me understand the importance of the Black church, I will be speaking with Pastor W. Nick Taliaferro, the senior pastor of the West Philadelphia Seventh day Adventist Church. In 2001, Pastor Taliaferro was appointed as the special assistant to the former Mayor John F. Street, and in that capacity created two new offices for the city of Philadelphia: the Mayor's Office of Faith-Based Initiatives and the Mayor's Office for the Reentry of Ex-Offenders. In 2006, he was appointed by the Philadelphia Commission of Human Relations to serve as the executive director, a position he held until 2008. Upon leaving government employment, he went on to develop and direct a program that provided ethical training for inmates. Pastor Taliaferro also has a talk show on WURDAM 900. Please join me in welcoming Pastor W. Nick Taliaferro. Let's talk about the Black church and the history of the Black church and how it provided refuge, security, and a way of release of strain for our ancestors.
Well, Melanie, first of all, thank you for inviting me on, and thanks for all the work that you do in our community. I don't think that people recognize the level of tireless energy that you bring to trying to heal some of the wounds that we face in our community. And so I appreciate spending this time with you. But talking about the Black church, and you say, let's talk about the Black church. A lot of times the Black church becomes the target of unreasonable criticism because of the role that it's played in the past. And let me restructure that for you if I can. And that is this. There was a time when the Black church in the Black community was the only institution that was viable to do almost anything. It was the church that started Black education. I mean, when you think about all of the colleges that exist, the HBCUs that are now so praised and acclaimed because of the new vice president, they were started by churches. It was the church that started financial institutions, credit unions, and banks, because the church was the only institution that the white overstructure of America would even pretend to respect. And so it was always in the forefront, doing pretty much everything. It was the church under the dynamic leadership of men like Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend C.T. Vivian and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. You know, all of these people had the title Reverend before their name. It was the church that led America into the conscientious awakening of the 60s that allowed us to face the hypocrisy of this nation. And so the church did all of these things, but now things have evolved. And you have a Black infrastructure that is a cadre of qualified businessmen and a cadre of qualified lawyers and a cadre of qualified engineers. And the church should take its rightful step back to do what it's supposed to be focused on, which is the renovation of souls and spirits, to provide encouragement for these other people to do what they do. But people are still looking to the church saying, why aren't you still doing everything? Why aren't you stopping the crime in the community? Why aren't you healing the coronavirus? And so when people talk about the church now, it's a mixed bag of people who nostalgically remember when the church was the mighty mitochondria of the community doing everything. And now that it's being, it's being not relegated, but it is assuming its real place, the spiritual center of the community. People are talking about it. But having said all that, let's talk about the Black church and how it really is still playing a very vital role in our communities. We start off with the fact that America has lost its moral center. We have allowed, for example, the Trump administration, and I don't want to become political here, But the problem with the Trump administration the last 4 years is the level of hypocrisy that was exhibited, that a nation that would say, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, would also say, now I'm going to build a wall to make sure that you're tired and poor don't get to see my face. That a nation that would say, we believe that in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, would then come up with a president who would say, America first, and actually interpret that as America only. And so that hypocrisy demands that you have a group of people who are willing, unbought and unbossed, willing to call leadership and power and authority back to an accountability that says we have to be true, as Martin Luther King said, to those things that we wrote on paper. We have to demonstrate a capacity to live according to certain principles of justice and righteousness and ethics and humanity. And that is what the church is now trying to do right now. As you and I are speaking, Reverend William Barber and Reverend Liz Theoharis are holding a Moral Monday protest that is a precursor to a poor people's crusade in the United States of America. Right now, while we're speaking, this is happening. So the church is taking on its moral, ethical position in the community again. And some people don't feel necessarily good about that.
Okay. Now, Black history is so important to me as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I gave it much thought as a child or a teenager.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
working in so many different arenas in the city of Philadelphia, and even while leading your congregation, do you see many young African American youth who are really aware of our history and what our ancestors had to go through for us?
I'm laughing because the scope of history has narrowed so much for today's young people. I mean, when you talk to a lot of today's young people about history, they start talking about the 1990s. you know, the scope is narrowed. They are unaware of the struggles of the past. They are unaware of the journey that is a part of this people that they are a part of. I mean, and so our young people, to them, Martin Luther King is historical.
Right.
I mean, that most of them stop right about there. Or as one young person said to me one time, I know who Martin Luther King is, but who was Malcolm the 10th? Because to him an X was a Roman numeral meaning 10. He just didn't know.
Right.
And so what we have to do is we have to make that history relevant to our young people again, and demonstrate to them why it is important, and help them to, one of the things that we fail to do for one another existentially is to respect the other person's journey, and to embrace another person and their journey and say, you know what you've gone through, I recognize it and I respect it. And then your work, you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
We have to do that with our own journey, and look back on the dark passage of the transatlantic slave trade without feeling the shame that we used to feel. I mean, everybody wants to get away from their shame, but we have to be able to embrace that part of our journey as triumph. That, as the Black national anthem speaks of, we look back over the stony, the way that we trod the stony path, and all of that beautiful metaphorical language about how God brought us through all of these things. We have to look back on that as triumph and teach our children how to own our former struggles historically as triumph, and how to use it as the foundation for launching ourselves even higher today.
Okay. Now, your church is located in West Philadelphia. Tell me about that area. Is it a high crime area? Granted, there are shootings taking place all over the city of Philadelphia.
Melanie, I've actually been losing sleep, and I'm not talking figuratively. I've been losing sleep about the ongoing the homicide rate in this city, and much of it now is centered right around my church. And it's this, at the same time that it's centered around my church, so is a lot of gentrification. Our church is at 46 in Haverford. Sits on, if you just took a picture of the church, you would think it was in the suburbs because it's beautifully landscaped. It has a large parking lot. it used to be right in the heart of the projects, but now they've renovated things, and so you see a lot of open space and sky. But I mean, but literally right out of my office window, a guy got shot a few months ago. Down the street, I mean, all around my church, there are these shootings, and what we're seeing now is violence and homicide, not as criminal acts, but as failures of sociology, where people don't know how to resolve their issues, or people in their pathological approach to feeling safe can only feel that way if they completely erase another person. And you may have noticed this in your work now. A lot of times when you hear about somebody being shot, you hear them saying the person was shot in the face or in the
Mhm,
head.
mhm, mhm.
These are acts, when someone shoots you in the face, they're not simply trying to stop the threat. They're trying to erase the person. It's like, I don't want you to, not only do I want you to be dead, I want you to never have existed. And so we're seeing sociological issues that are playing out over a spectrum of psychological impairments that we have to confront, because this is not simply crime. This is human pathology that we are confronting
Mm. Yeah, and homicides in the city of Philadelphia are growing at an alarming rate in 2021 already, just as it
already.
had in 2020. Now, it boggles my mind to think that someone can take another life and not think twice about it. It
Yeah.
boggles my mind that so many young African American men and women have been murdered at the hands of other African Americans.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
ancestors have fought so hard for us today, and this is how we're repaying them. Now, Pastor, tell me how you are able to, one, communicate with that mother or communicate with that father who has lost a child to gun violence, and two, how do you mentally balance the homicides that are taking place but still stay encouraged to lead your
Mm.
flock?
Good questions, both. I mean, the first thing about dealing with people who pass through this valley of shadow is to acknowledge the shadow. I'm almost outraged when people with good intentions go to these individuals and they come with these platitudes that try to mollify and soften the blow by saying things like, well, you loved him, but God loved him best, and God always takes the prettiest flowers for his bouquet and for his garden, and how, somehow or another, this is going to be better in the long run. All of that stuff says to me that I don't want to really deal with your pain. The extraordinary grief that a mother or a father feels when they have to put their 18, 19, 20-year-old into a casket and into a grave. We're not wired to bury our children. We just aren't. And so that's the first thing. It is to embrace with the individuals who have suffered the loss. And I've done this quite a bit recently, to embrace that suffering and saying, I can only imagine what you feel, or I'm so sorry for your loss. And, I know that you are going through something that is unimaginable, but I'm here to lend heart and hand and shoulder to walk through as many tomorrows with you as is necessary to help you get through it. And step by step, we get through it, because the human spirit is resilient, and we walk through it. And then we try to honor the life that was taken, even if the life that was taken in a space and in a place where the things that were being done or transacted may not have been the most honorable. That's first. Secondly, is how do I stay encouraged? One must recognize from a spiritual perspective that everything that we see and touch in this material world will one day fade and die. Everything. And that we are not placed in this world to stay. At our very best, at our very strongest, we will one day die. We all will pass through, and that this world is a dress rehearsal for a space and a time that is yet to come. And so when we are pressed and when we are broken in this material temporal world in which we live, I have to remind myself that even though the circumstances may not be what I have chosen, that what appears to be a period in this material world is only a comma in the spiritual world, and and that I believe that even in the darkness, that there's a bright side that awaits. And that helps me. But sometimes the pain of the present eclipses my view of the glory that is yet to come. And we all struggle sometimes.
That is so true. And I struggle a lot.
I can't imagine what you go through.
It's Pastor, it's like bad. And so much so that my work cell is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because crime just doesn't happen Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I want to be able to be there for that mother, that father, that domestic violence victim, that shooting victim. So, but the part that really gets me and brings me to my knees often is the babies that are affected by gun violence. And I can't understand it. And you know, my father's Reverend Dr. John L. Payne, and I'm calling him constantly like, okay, Dad, I cannot wrap my mind around this. The babies are innocent, and there are so many shootings taking place in the city of Philadelphia, and there's people caught in a crossfire. Do these people even care who you're affecting when you're shooting at someone else? So, Pastor, it's hard. And then with dealing with the COVID pandemic, all of these things are like layered on top of one another. And there are just so many people who are struggling mentally, just like myself. Like, what word of encouragement would you have for us, for me, who's struggling and in this line of work, and for that parent who's lost their child and have to stay in the house because of the COVID? And even think about the parents whose child is laying up in the hospital, shot, and they can't go in the hospital because of the COVID restrictions. So we are struggling mentally. Pastor, what word of encouragement do you have for us?
You know, you, first of all, you are the encouragement. The fact that an entity like Northwest Victim Services exists reminds us that in this cold and hard world in which we live, that as human beings, we have tried to find ways to assuage the pain and to soothe the hurt and to heal the brokenness by agencies like Northwest and others. And that, you know, your tireless energy reminds me that there are people who are on the front lines who are constantly linking arms and walking hand in hand to stop this world from sliding over the edge. That's an encouragement when you look around and you see people like you. That's one part. Then the second part is this: we have to remind ourselves that even in the middle of this pandemic, that crime is actually down. But what's up is desperation. I mean, people are desperate, and we recognize that people are very desperate, but that crime is actually down. One of the problems that we have is that our capacity to tell stories has increased so exponentially that the same crime that used to get one mention in the news now gets 50 because it's on 25 different channels and they talk about it twice a day. And so it appears that the case of humanity is much worse, but at the same time, there are people with GoFundMe pages to try to rescue people from the pits of despair. You know, we have to do a better job in sharing the sunlight rather than simply reporting on the darkness. And and that's something that we have to work on. We specialize now in relating the stories of brokenness and stories of pain and of hurt, rather than, I mean, think about it. How many people know about the latest shooting, but they don't know about, you know, Melany Nelson? I mean, think about that. And you know, we can encourage each other by relating the positive stories, the good wins that we get, rather than the perceived losses that we endure.
That's true. And yeah, I do need people to know about Northwest Victim Services, because we've been affected by the COVID. So of course we couldn't have our major annual fundraiser. So we're looking for creative ways to spread the word when you get
if there's a creative way to be found, I know exactly who's going to find it.
So that would be good. We need that philanthropist that's gonna say, okay, take $1 million and
Let me tell
what
you.
you gotta do to serve victims of crime. So that would be awesome. So Pastor, tell me, what message would you have for our young African American youth and those young shooters that are picking up those guns because they're afraid for their life.
Yeah.
We had a program in Martin Luther King High School, and some of those young men would say to me, Miss Nelson, either you're going to be the predator or the prey. So
Yep.
sometimes
Yeah.
youth are robbed of their innocence because they feel that they have to protect themselves. They feel that they have to carry this gun. So what message would you have for our youth who are faced with these trying times? And Pastor, you know this is real and what we're living with. And when you're like, even West Oak Lane, there's so many shootings and so many homicides in West Oak Lane, but
Yeah.
these children feel like they have to protect themselves. What message do you have for them?
Well, it's I mean, you asked the critical question, and I remember I'll use this illustration. I was at an aquarium, one of these big aquariums, and I'm looking at this big tank filled with fish, and there's sharks swimming in the tank with the fish. And so I asked the curator of the aquarium. I said, "Why isn't the shark eating the other fish?" I mean, because that's what you see all the time. And the curator said, because, the sharks know that they're going to be fed. And because they know they're going to be fed, they don't have a need to kill the other fish around them. And it dawned upon me that when you live in a society that is so traumatized by loss and dearth and a lack of resource, where the next moment is rendered insecure by the fact that the previous moment existed in nothingness, that level of threat that people live with makes them predatory. They have to kill to survive. When you look at the jungle and you see the lion killing a wildebeest, the lion didn't stay up late at night saying, "Man, I'm gonna kill that sucker because I know what he said about me." It wasn't personal. It's
Right.
that I have to kill to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But if a person knows that their needs are going to be addressed and cared for, they're no longer predatory. They don't have to kill anymore. That biblical statement where it says that they will beat their swords into plowshares, and no one will hurt and kill on my holy mountain, is because everybody knows that they're cared for. The problem we have in our communities is that there's such a dearth of resources. We have allowed trauma to build up to the point where people are born, and there's a field of study called epigenetics that speaks of the fact that your children are born with the anxieties that you carried. People are born with a sense of threat and dearth and a lack of resource. And as such, they adapt the ways of predatory behavior, not because not because they're worse people, not because they're bad people, but because they perceive that if they are not willing to take a life, their life will be taken. So we have to reconstruct our communities so that our young men and our young women are cognizant of the fact, and it becomes a reality for them, that their needs will be met, that their needs will be addressed, and therefore you don't have to destroy in order to get your needs met. And that is, now we're talking about dealing with, trauma-informed therapy. Now we're talking about creating models of restorative and balanced justice so that, when a person who's already desperate and in a predatory state because of that desperation, they get caught and now they become abused even more, the desperation deepens. We need a model of justice that allows people to know that there's healing available. So it reduces the predatory notions and the traumatic effects of living in a world without being fairly and justly addressed for your own needs. I know that sounds like I'm being some kind of bleeding heart liberal, but I'm talking about justice and an ethical society. And that's what we have to do to make a difference.
Very well stated, Pastor. Now, you are on WURD 900 AM, correct?
I am.
Okay. Tell me about your radio show.
Yes, radio. I have had the privilege of being in radio for 20 years now in one form or another. And my show is on from 4 until 7, Monday through Thursday. It's entitled Evening Words with Nick Taliaferro. They named the program after me. Either my name is Evening Words or my name is Nick Taliaferro. It's one or the other. But from 4 o'clock until 7 o'clock, what we like to do is bring before the people topics of engagement that will allow them to raise their perspectives and to challenge their preconceived notions. We had a talk last week about the death penalty, and it is amazing how many people who have been abused, mistreated, and unjustly and unfairly treated by the justice system are still willing to use the death penalty as a tool of justice. And so we wanted to raise their perspective and alter their paradigm on that. And so what we do is we bring guests that people normally wouldn't get a chance to speak to talk about some of the issues that we talk about every day. For example, I'm looking up on my bookshelf right now at a book called Violence: Reflections on an American Epidemic by a gentleman named Dr. James Gilligan, who talks about why certain communities are more violent than others.
Oh,
Extraordinary work that he has done. And this allows people to look at a topic and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I need to think about this in a different way. And so I'd like to think that my radio program is an act of ministry in a different form, but I have a lot of fun engaging people.
that's excellent. And that book is excellent too, because think about this. Again, West Oak Lane and West Philly, there's a lot of gun violence.
Yeah.
But Chestnut Hill, Manioc, Roxborough, going into the 5th Police District, you may have one homicide every 3 or 4 years. And why is that? So that's something that we need to discuss, and I would love to come on your show to discuss that.
And look, it's open. Black History Month would be a good time. Before this day is over, let's lock you into a day to talk about the work that you do and that others like you are doing and the need for that work. There's something to be said about, Chestnut. People in Chestnut Hill are under stress. They have more money, but they're under stress. The people in Roxborough are under stress. People in Bridesburg, which is a neighborhood that is mostly white, has an identical crime pattern rate as North Philly, but they don't have a homicide rate. And that's because people who are of the dominant class of this society, people who are white, have a sense that justice can be gotten, that fairness will be distributed, that they will have access to the levers of power that will make changes for them. They have a sense of that. So even if they're poor, and even if they have, stress and something like that, they don't have that sense of desperation that I will not receive justice or that justice is unavailable to me. Therefore, they don't go across the precipice that says, in my desperation, I have to kill or take another life. I have to be willing to go completely to the wall because there's an opportunity waiting for me, even if they're poorer than I am. But in other neighborhoods where justice, you call the cops and then the next thing you know, you're arrested for something that you were calling them to help you for.
Right.
You
Right.
quickly get to a point where your desperation says, I've got to be willing to do drastic things. And that's how homicide and murderous violence becomes a part of a community and a culture. And in the United States of America, it's the Black community and culture. But in other cultures, like in Northern Ireland, it was Catholics in Northern Ireland. In other countries, in the Baltic regions, there were other individuals who went through the same things. And this is what Dr. Gilligan points out, that you can see the same circumstances in certain cultures, different races, and the same results will be produced. So that we can end violence, we can end homicidal rage in our communities if we're willing to attack the problem and not simply become fixed on some type of wayward, punitive solutions that are not working anyway.
Knowing the past opens the door for the future. I am the proud daughter of Reverend Dr. John L. Payne and Patricia A. Payne, two strong African American individuals who have devoted their lives to helping others. They have also devoted their lives to educating, loving, and spreading joy to everyone they come in contact with. I take pride in making them happy every chance I get. I walk with dignity and respect. I speak with intelligence and grace. And I also carry myself with confidence. I am proud of my parents and I am proud of my ancestors. I am my brothers and sisters' keeper. We, as African Americans, must uplift each other. We must encourage each other and we must love each other. You could be the one to change the world. The power of one starts with you.